Jewish Heritage. I'm Ellen Rudolph, the Executive Director. We're delighted to have Steve Litt here tonight to talk about the future of our region, which to me feels so much more vibrant in a sustainable way than it has in many years. So I'm very excited to hear Steve's take on things. This program is part of the 2014-2015 Cleveland Jewish History and Public Policy Series, co-sponsored by Cleveland Jewish News Foundation, the Lauren Alvin Siegel Lifelong Learning Program at Case Western Reserve University, Teaching Cleveland Digital, and the Maltz Museum of Jewish Heritage. I just want to mention that the next program in this series is called The Moral Imperative, Jewish Leadership in the Integration of Shaker Heights, which will be held here at the museum on Wednesday, February 18th. Before I introduce Steve, I want to just bring up Larry Friedman from the Cleveland Jewish News Foundation for a quick word.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming out tonight. The Cleveland Jewish News Foundation is very pleased to be participating in this program with the other organizations that we just mentioned, and we just wanted to always pass on our three initiatives and goals of the foundation. First is to maintain and support the Cleveland Jewish News digital archive. Two is to support the Cleveland Jewish News internship program, which helps college students and also takes care of some of the needs of the Cleveland Jewish News. And finally, to have community education, which is clearly one of the goals that's supported by tonight's program. So hope you enjoy it all, and thank you very much for coming out.
One more plug before I introduce Steve. If you haven't seen the exhibition State of Deception, The Power of Nazi Propaganda, which Steve very eloquently reviewed recently in the PD, I really encourage you to see it. Okay, a native of New York, Steve Litt has been the art and architecture critic of the Plain Dealer since 1991, covering museums and galleries, architecture, historic preservation, and city and regional planning. He also writes for Metropolis, Art News, Architectural Record, and other magazines. Steve holds master's degrees in journalism and city planning and was a Michigan Journalism Fellow at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. He's been named Best Critic in Ohio 8 times since 2004 by the Cleveland Press Club and the Ohio Society of Professional Journalists. And he's a 2010 winner of the Robert Bergman Prize of the Cleveland Arts Prize, awarded to recognize the highest possible expression of art stewardship. Please welcome Steve Litt.
Okay. Can everyone hear me? Am I on? Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. Okay, great. Could we dim the house lights? Thank you. So good evening, everyone. I see lots of familiar faces, so thank you all for coming out tonight. And thank you, Ellen, and thank you, Larry, and the Cleveland Jewish News Foundation, and Michael Barron for inviting me here tonight. I think I can go to the first slide because you can see that fairly easily while the lights are still up. So one of the things that I love about what I do for a living is that I get to cover people whose business is shaping the future. And it's just really exciting to be thinking about the choices that a city and a region have to make as they contemplate that future. I have to apologize, though, if you came here tonight thinking that I have the crystal ball and I'm going to give you the answer. I can't. Well, what I can say is that all of us together are going to shape the future through the choices that we make, either where we live, where we shop, worship. All of the activities of daily life involve choices, and those things play out in the landscape in ways that call into being cities and buildings and roads and streets and cause us to pay taxes and so on. So I'm talking tonight about the relationship between those choices and the physical environments that we build and how much it costs to maintain them and who pays. So as Ellen mentioned a moment ago, we really seem to be on a roll in Cleveland and Northeast Ohio right now, especially Cleveland. I can't remember any other time since I've been here. It's almost, quarter century, it seems like. It's gone by so fast. But, to see so many travel magazines and publications talking about Cleveland, that we're on all these hot lists. You got to come see this and that. You got to go to the Museum of Contemporary Art Cleveland and the Rock Hall and the new Cleveland Museum of Art. We've got the Republican National Convention in 2016, LeBron's homecoming. You all remember that those two things happened in the same week last June. Really exciting stuff. And it's all starting to bury that memory of the burning river. That idea that every time you got on a plane and you went to another city and told somebody you're from Cleveland, you could wait for it, and it wasn't that long before you'd hear about the old, the mayor of the burning hair and the burning river and Johnny Carson's jokes and all of that kind of stuff. Anyhow, we're putting all that behind us. So there's this sense that we have turned a corner and it's all great. Well, maybe not. I and a lot of other people, I should say, I'm looking at the work of a lot of other people who are looking at the numbers and looking at the quanta, trying to figure out have we really turned the corner? And, we have not turned the corner on population. I have a meter here because, the needle has not changed. Tax base in Cleveland and Cuyahoga County still falling. We've seen redistricting. We're losing power in Congress. And we still face tremendous obstacles in redeveloping the urban core, which is really what we have to be about in Northeast Ohio. So we have big choices ahead of us always. Do we do more of the same? Do we continue with the sprawl development that has been eating away at the centers of our cities for decades? Do we grow differently? How do we choose? And what's the right scale to think about those decisions? And do we have the government systems in place to enable us to make those decisions? I would contend that we don't really think very robustly on a regional scale, and so I'll be talking tonight about why regionalism matters. And then ultimately, since I'm really interested in aesthetics and came to all of these topics through art history, I'll be talking about why good design matters a little bit at the end. I love thinking about different dimensions of time. When you talk about cities and art history, you're really thinking thousands of years in the past up into the present. It's a form of time travel. When we think about the future of our cities and our region, we're projecting forward beyond our generation and into the future and trying to calibrate the investments we make today. If you think even beyond it, at bigger scales, bigger time scales, and in space, there's astronomy to tell us where we are. Now, just a little excursion on this for a moment, because I think it's really amazing to think about the planet that we live on and how unusual it is in the vast universe that we inhabit. This is a picture of the Milky Way from a mountaintop observatory in Chile, which is becoming a center for what they call astrotourism. You can actually go to these places and see these things. So here's our galaxy. This is the Milky Way, and over here is the Andromeda Galaxy, which is the closest thing to us, and the closest big thing out there. And here we are. This is our beautiful planet. You all remember this photograph from the Apollo missions back in the late 1960s. What a thrill it was to see our beautiful planet floating in the great emptiness of space, which is full of these other objects that are way, way out there. And think about the dimensions of time that we've been through on the planet and how unusual life on the planet is, or in this universe that we inhabit. And this is one of many time scales that you could pull off the internet, which showed that mankind, if we were talking about the 4.5 billion years since the Earth formed, mankind appears at 40 seconds before midnight. That's just hominids. I'm not talking about civilization and all that stuff, which happens in the past 10,000 years. So mankind and cities and the things that we're doing on the planet are a very recent phenomenon. If we roll the clock forward 3 billion years from now, that Andromeda Galaxy that I mentioned is going to be colliding with the Milky Way and creating all kinds of wild things to look at night. And for those of you who know anything about mountains, this is the Grand Teton. That's the silhouette of our beautiful national park. In a more immediate sense, now that we're in this man-centered age where we have megacities that are growing to vast size and we're actually beginning to influence the climate, we've got some immediate business to attend to in terms of managing ourselves on this incredible planet that we inhabit. Population has reached 7 billion. We believe, many scientists believe, that we're in a new era of geological time called the Anthropocene, and that's dated to 1945 and the explosion of the first atomic bomb. We have food and water insecurity in many parts of the planet, global migrations of poor populations that are looking for opportunity, extreme weather, rising sea levels, which exacerbate phenomena like the tsunami in Japan, and then very dramatic global economic inequality, which is causing a lot of tension. This is an urban age that we're living in, and it's going to become an even more urban age. Cities are where it's at. 54% of the global population of 7.2 billion now live in cities. That number will increase by 2045 to 6 billion, and urban inhabitants will be 2/3 of the global population. You can see how this lays out on a map with the megacities in red, these red dots, and you can see how they're concentrated mainly in an arc from the Mediterranean to the Pacific through southern Asia. I can't think of anything more powerful to show this inflection point than this population graph from the United Nations, which shows the trend. And also, the United Nations is talking about how Asia and Africa are going to see the most intense urbanization over the next century. Cities will be becoming bigger, and more populations are going to be concentrating in cities as the planet continues to warm. Those of you who read the New York Times probably remember seeing this a couple of weeks ago. This is a map of temperature globally, temperatures in 2014 in comparison to the 1951-1980 average. And the story that accompanied this said that we've just experienced, I think it was 14 of the 15 warmest years on record. The interesting thing about this from our perspective, and I'll be going back and forth from the global to the local here, is if you look at the upper Midwest and the Great Lakes, we're in the cool spot. In fact, if you look at all the continents in the northern hemisphere, we're the only place that's heavily populated where temperatures seem to be dropping. So climate change and global, it may not necessarily mean global warming where you live, but it is a phenomenon to contend with. And it's causing all kinds of stresses. This is a map from another United Nations report showing hazards that cities will face because of environmental concerns. And you can see on the Pacific here in the Ring of Fire, where there are so many volcanoes and earthquakes and tsunamis, there are risks there, and also the other coast here on the Pacific. There's a lot of seismic activity. New York and Los Angeles are at risks. They get hazards in the top 3 deciles. I don't know exactly what that means, but one could imagine it means hurricanes, heavy storms, earthquakes, those kinds of things. And those risks are exacerbated with population and density. New York City makes the list of the world's biggest cities, but North America is still one of the least densely populated areas in the world. So in urban areas, the built-up urban areas, population density is, which means how many people live per acre, is most intense in those areas of Africa and Asia. So cities look really different from one another. The biggest city in the world is Tokyo, population 37.8 million. But the densest city is Dhaka in Bangladesh, which has nearly, let's see, more than 40,000 people per square kilometer. So these are incredible problems that city planners are going to be working on over the next century. Why are these cities growing all over the place? Agricultural modernization is reducing the need for labor, so people can leave farms and move to cities to seek new opportunities in education. Healthcare is better. They can participate politically and escape from traditions that might be holding them back. This is a picture of Shanghai. This has implications for the global climate, and we're part of this because we're a city too. Reducing rural populations can open up more land for agriculture and can also preserve open space, which is good for the health of the planet. Cities concentrate pollution in concentrated areas where it can be managed better, but planned urbanization can reduce the environmental impact, and actually within cities per capita consumption of resources is less. So if you're living in a suburb and driving 50 miles to work as opposed to taking mass transit in a city, you're producing less carbon as you get around. If this all sounds very scary, I want to emphasize cities are also works of art. We love cities. We travel around the world to visit these places. Obviously, a picture of Rome from the Dome of St. Peter's. Cities can also be green, as I mentioned before, because concentrated populations can live in a way that consumes less carbon. And you have innovative examples such as Copenhagen, which aims to be the world's first zero-emission city by 2025. Part of their strategy is to redesign their transportation network so that people can get around by bike. And they said they have 249 miles of cycle tracks, which is a specific kind of bike path. I'm not going to get into the technicalities, but it's very high level, high quality, and it's a high quality experience. As opposed to what urbanization looks like in much of the United States, which is this. And when we think about sustainability and the cost of maintaining all of that infrastructure and the number of taxpayers spread out like peanut butter across that landscape, which could be Los Angeles, it could be Phoenix, it could be many other cities. In fact, we look like this from the air as well, parts of our region. That's a question for the future. Why? Another reason to care about cities is that they're very productive. Here's a McKinsey report saying that the only 600 centers that have 20% of the world's population generate 60% of global GDP. So cities work. 10% of global GDP growth will come from the from U.S. cities by 2025. We're part of that story. And almost 85% of U.S. GDP is generated by our 260 largest cities. So we're part of that story as well. But are we competitive? Maybe not. The number for GDP in the Cleveland-Elyria MSA, Metropolitan Statistical Area, was 116 billion in 2014, but that only got us to 27 on the list of U.S. urban metros, and we dropped our position here. Let's see, where's Cleveland? From 17th place in 78 to, where are we? 27th place in 2010. Relative to all these other cities, and become bypassed by Pittsburgh, and we're even behind Detroit. But all the cities in red, migrated down, and we're in that club. We're in a different club as well, and when you go to conferences and you talk about a place like Cleveland, we are usually lumped with what's called the legacy cities, which peaked in their population in around mid-century. They have fixed boundaries, so they can't annex their suburbs and grow out of their problems that way. They have concentrated poverty because usually the white populations move and leave concentrated areas of African American poverty behind. There's a loss of manufacturing jobs, and these are mostly northern and industrial cities, but some are in the south as well. Here's a map from a recent study of legacy cities, color-coded to show areas of growth, such as in Philadelphia and Washington, D.C., but all the other cities are losing population. Another chart here from a recent report showing how Cleveland is behaving like all the other legacy cities in Ohio. I would have not put Columbus on this list because it's really a post-war city in the sense that it was able to annex its suburbs, and you can see the impact there in population growth. So what's our problem? Our problem in Northeast Ohio is that we have falling population, but we're consuming more land. So we're building out into the cornfields while we're abandoning urban neighborhoods, creating a mismatch between where infrastructure exists, how many taxpayers there are, and where we're building new infrastructure to support people who want to move further out. So we have these built-in disadvantages because of the migration, the loss of jobs and people to the Sun Belt and the coasts. Again, we're consuming more land, building more infrastructure than we can afford, and that's building in a higher long-term cost basis, which we're going to feel in the form of higher taxes. And if there's one slide that you remember here tonight, this is it, because this is the decision slide. So I'm going to spend just a few minutes on this. It's a little tricky to figure out, but I'll walk through it slowly. This is information gathered by Vibrant Neo 2040, which has been the biggest regional planning effort in Northeast Ohio in 50 years. These things don't come along very often. Planning can be a county function. It can be done at the metropolitan level, but land use and zoning are local powers. So you can tell cities and villages what to do, but it's really up to them. So it's like herding cats. The result of all of the individual decisions where people are zoning for growth is that we have more people moving out. So what that means is that there's going to be an enormous amount of housing units abandoned in our urban areas, and if you tore down just a third of them, the cost would be $500 million between now and 2040. And meanwhile, if you think that moving out is going to be great for you and for the region, the Vibrant Neo report from this planning study shows that that's not the case. This diagram shows the difference, the range in municipal revenue between the cost of running your city and what you bring in revenue. And for some communities it's positive today. The average is that it's negative, that everybody's feeling a little pain. And then some communities are down here in the 7-8% in the red in terms of budget pressure. When you roll the clock forward, if the trends continue that we have now, which is population loss in our cities and sprawl in the outer counties, the best off cities in the future are going to be worse off than the worst cities today, and the worst cities are going to be really badly off. Now this is if you did nothing. This assumes you did nothing else and you didn't raise taxes. That everybody's going to be looking at really red balance sheets in the future. Obviously that's not going to happen. This is just a straight line extension of current trends. So how did we get here? Cleveland is a fairly young city. If you think about cities around the world, some of them are incredibly old. We've been through 4 or 5 cycles of growth and redevelopment in rapid succession. We can change course, but how? We think about our past, and again, I like thinking on these larger scales just to remind myself and hopefully to have you think about this as well. The city of Cleveland is a relatively recent phenomenon. America is a very recent phenomenon. This is what the continent looked like with the glacier receding in 9000 BC, while the city of Jericho was being founded. If you spun the globe around and looked at the Middle East, you had the Fertile Crescent, and cities are beginning on the other side of the planet. But this is what we look like, and in this diagram you can see our county boundary, Cuyahoga County, imposed on a green, verdant landscape. So, settlement happens and we begin carving up the landscape. The Northwest Ordinance comes along in 1787, and the government starts surveying west of the Ohio River and imposing the survey grid, which determines where our roads go and how our county boundaries are drawn, and many of our townships and cities start to emerge out of that. And you'll notice it has absolutely nothing to do with geography. It's just carving up landscape to facilitate commerce, sale, founding of cities and towns. So here's our history in a nutshell. Heavy industry. We have our grid here platted by Moses Cleveland. We become a great industrial powerhouse, and all that accumulated capital gets sublimated into beautiful cultural resources that are spurring our recovery today. Cleveland has grown through some very choppy waters in terms of federal policy towards cities. This is a long list of, laundry list of policies that some would say are pro-city, some would say are against cities, but there really has been no consistent effort on the national level to help cities. So it's been very difficult to navigate cities, to guide cities over the past, especially over the past 50 years. We could look at any one of these policies, and there's probably many more that we could throw up on the screen, and talk about how they've made it difficult for Cleveland to chart its course. But I'm just going to pick one, which is the Interstate Highway Program. It facilitated incredible movement across the country and commerce, but at the same time did a lot of damage to cities. And we had a protest movement here in the 1960s, which stopped the Clark Freeway and the Lee Freeway from coming into the east side. And it's just really, right by where we are now. So this is what the interchange of Clark Freeway and the Lee Freeway would have looked like with Lower Shaker Lake. Can you imagine what that would have done? And then here we are, right over in our neighborhood here. I think we're over here somewhere. Or no, I'm sorry. And we would be in this quadrant, right by this big interchange of the Clark Freeway and 271. So thank goodness that it didn't happen. But the interstates and other trends that I've described have not been friendly to Cleveland, so the city has lost population over time. Even while the state population has grown slightly, Cleveland has shrunk in relation to Cuyahoga County, and you can see our arc here, which brings us back to where we were in 1900. The city had a lot of image problems in the 60s and 70s. We all remember these photos, no need to describe them. And over the past 20 or 30 years, we've seen a real bounce back, concerted effort by government and business working together on big projects to change the image of the city. And they've been pretty successful as far as they go. And now there's a new generation of planners talking about how do we connect all of these things, how do we build streetscapes and urban environments that will make all of this work together. There's a new toolkit. Public-private partnerships, community development corporations, tax abatements, tax credits, lots of incentives to get the private market to invest in areas that are more difficult to develop than the suburban greenfields. And it's been really successful so far. And this is where we get all the positive publicity and the travel magazines coming and saying how great we are. We're also seeing our new engines of our economy here in medicine and higher education. And all of those things are beginning to attract a new residential audience, especially in downtown. And the change here is so great that we can hardly believe it. So this is what we're writing about all the time. The millennials, they're coming. It's just fantastic. And developers are responding with these incredible developments like what MRN Limited has done downtown on East 4th Street. So the big question that everybody wants to know is, what happens if this demographic trend changes? Because we're banking on this so much. Well, the Wall Street Journal last week published a story, and it was based on a study by the housing industry, which means really the suburban housing industry, that they don't think that this is going to last. But I think the journal really enjoyed kind of tweaking all the people who feel that the millennials are sort of fantastic by saying, hey, when they grow up, they're not going to live in the downtown Cleveland. They're going to go out to Solon. And so if you own a house in Solon, or you want to build a house in Solon, that's good news for you. And those are the people who read that publication. But there are other countervailing views. The jury is out on what the millennials are going to do when they grow up. But here's some data. The data show that the total change in population in Cleveland 2000 to 2010 was negative 17.1%. But the change in the 25 to 34 age group in Cleveland was negative 25%. So it was actually 7.7% worse than the average. So this is telling us, and this is from a study by Alan Malik that was published by the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, I would consider an objective look at the numbers. So we may be seeing isolated areas where exciting things are happening, but it's not changing the big picture. Here's one of them, which is downtown. Lots of exciting things. The one figure here that just jumps out is 98.3% residential occupancy. That's just a big alarm to anyone who's in development here. I got to run out and build an apartment building tomorrow so I can get this market window. It's really fantastic. But there's the question. Do we really believe all this? Is this changing our region? The answer is no, it's not. We still have population loss. We are still bleeding in terms of property values, especially in the urban core. There's a scholar that I follow, a guy named Tom Beyer, who studies housing policy. He's at Cleveland State University. And so here are, some more numbers, nonpartisan numbers here. Cuyahoga County has lost 175,000 people over the past, between 85 and 2010, while adjacent counties grew by 250,000. The net result is practically zero growth, though, and that's what you got to remember. Tom is alarmed because Cuyahoga County is approaching build-out. So anything that you do to concentrate population in Cuyahoga County will mean tearing something down and rebuilding it, or dealing with a brownfield, or doing something else that, if you're a developer and you look at your balance sheet, is going to add more upfront costs that you have to fund some other way. Either through subsidies or through extra height on a skyscraper like the one that Bob Stark is proposing. More bad news. Residential, commercial, industrial properties lost 5% of their value between '94 and 2013 in Cuyahoga County, or $4.1 billion. Meanwhile, growing areas in adjacent counties added nearly 50% in value, or $35 billion. So that tells you what's really happening in this region. USA Today did a recent story asking, is this going to stop? Has the sprawl machine stopped because of the recession? And their analysis between 2006 and 2011 here in this color-coded map, and red is gain, blue is loss, shows that things have calmed down in our region a little bit. Okay? But, we're 3-4 years beyond that now, so the question is, has the sprawl machine started again? We don't have any regional dashboards to tell us that. I'm hoping we develop them, and I'll come back to that later. Obstacles to planning, to getting control of all of this, is that include the fact that the scale of government that we have doesn't correspond to the scale of the problem, which really goes beyond our county and involves the 12 counties of Northeast Ohio. So you have a gap at the regional level, and I explained before what home rule is all about. Planning and zoning zoning and land use are local matters. So into this conversation a few years ago, very quietly, came the Obama administration in a program called the Partnership for Sustainable Communities. This was a partnership of 3 federal agencies, and I'm going to be like Rick Perry here and forget the third one, but one is HUD, Department of Transportation, and EPA. It helps to have slides. I love it. Okay, so the idea of the partnership was to get these 3 agencies together. Remember I said that federal policy is always working in conflict and creating it, more difficulty for cities when they plan? Well, the Obama administration finally said, you know, we can't tell HUD to do one thing that doesn't agree with what DOT is doing. If DOT is funding highways and HUD wants to build cities, you know, so let's get everybody working together. And let's provide some planning grants that will incentivize regions to work together. And our region applied for one, and I know Howard Mayers. Hi, Howard. How are you? I'm back. Howard was the director of NOACA, which is our metropolitan planning organization, which led that grant and pulled together 3 other regional planning organizations which have oversight over how transportation dollars are spent. Sorry, I hope that's as technical as I get tonight. This was the biggest regional planning effort in 50 years. These things don't come along very often, again, because planning and zoning are local. It was nonprofit, voluntary membership. It included 12 counties, major universities, foundations, and institutions, the 4 metropolitan planning organizations, which again have their hands on that federal purse, the transportation money that's coming in for highways and transit. It was a $4.2 million grant with plenty of local cash and no political power. It's persuasion. Let's gather facts. Let's tell people the truth and see what happens. So what did they find? Well, exactly what Tom Beyer found. Bleeding in the core and growth on the fringe. We, at the Plain Dealer, turned that into a graphic, and you can see here in this population density map the gap between Summit County and Cuyahoga in, where are we, 1970, fills in 40 years later. And the big story here is that population in this region, this 12-county region, declined by 7% from 1970 to 2010. It went from 4.1 million to 3.8 million. Meanwhile, we consumed 400 square miles more land, right? That's 400 square miles of roads, shopping lots, parking malls, churches, schools, sewer pipes, you name it. So what's wrong with that equation? More stuff, fewer taxpayers. Are we getting the picture now? This is not a partisan argument, I'm telling you here, folks. This is not right or left, Republican or Democrat. This is the chaos that we face right now in Northeast Ohio. So when I publish stories about this, I get a lot of pushback from Tea Party folks who say that this kind of effort is trying to tell them where to live and to infringe on their individual liberty. And I say, no, this is about paying your own cost of living. We're zoned for expansion and growth in Northeast Ohio. That was one of the discoveries of this planning effort. We're zoned for millions more people than we have living here. So that means that each town and city are going to be stealing from each other. And that zoning is a legacy of planning that was done way back in the 50s and 60s when the highways were coming in. This is a headline from the Plain Dealer in 1960. 5 million people. Ha ha ha. What are we now? Under 400,000. Okay. But they did predict this sprawl ooze going all the way down, and lo and behold, the highway network that we built facilitated that. That's exactly what we have now, is this sprawl between Cleveland and Canton. Back to the political discussion of who pays and how do you compute the cost of living. Really, really complicated stuff. And I'll just throw out a couple of things to think about. H plus T means your cost of housing plus your cost of transportation as a percentage of your household budget. If it's over a certain percentage, 30, 40, 50%, you're going to start to feel pain. You don't want to live further out. You're going to try to live closer, reduce one of those things. Live in cheaper housing, pay less for transportation. That's a break on sprawl. Time is another factor. How much time do you want to spend commuting? Impact on the environment. Every gallon of gas you burn sends 19 pounds of carbon into the atmosphere. And think about that heat map that I showed you at the beginning from the New York Times. Things are warming up here. And then there's the long-term cost of infrastructure, which is pressure on the pocketbook, taxes. So the recommendations of the Northeast Ohio Sustainable Communities Consortium, which is a terrible mouthful, that produced the Vibrant Neo vision, is that we've got to stop sprawl, We have to redevelop cities, develop along existing transportation corridors, don't build more capacity, preserve open land or add to open land, concentrate jobs in housing, and try to help people get from housing to jobs, and encourage density and mixed use. So to anyone who doesn't want to look at planning science and data, those are fighting words because it just sounds like big government is trying to tell you what to do. This is the vision reduced to a single sheet of paper, and the red here, which looks like angry bruises, is actually where they're recommending that investment be made. These areas here, these yellow areas are like sort of like caution zones. Maybe you don't want to invest in there. And then there's a wonderful vision about creating this network of open spaces that tie the whole region together. But I think the core of it is that we need to strengthen our transportation spines, especially through mass transit. And I believe that because out of all the factors that I think determine land use and development, to me, transportation is most important. And we can argue about that maybe in the question and answer period. So this is some of the feedback. Good luck with this boondoggle plan. It amazes me of all the people who still believe this region has a future. Makes me want to laugh out loud. That was only in Cuyahoga. Snotless said, they lost me at Vibrant. And then Gary Cantor's a frequent flyer on our website says, the same agencies, same public funding, same nothingness results. In other words, don't even think about this. I just want to go home, pull a blanket over my head and not think about it at all. Okay. So how do we make decisions? There are lots and lots of things that we can do as a society. There is a new sort of benchmark for building guidelines called LEED, which is it's a very complicated sort of building code that rates projects in terms of their greenness. So if you get LEED Platinum, that's a signal to the market that you are on the right side of the question, and that can help you sell your property. So developers are really getting excited about this and doing LEED. There's Energy Star for appliances. There's a new building technique that's gaining ground in the U.S. and in Ohio called Passive House, which is basically coming out of Germany, and it's the idea of turning your home into a kind of a giant thermos bottle, like the the PNC Smart Home at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History. Expensive, but it pays off over the long term. And planning and design review. But to me, the most important one is the Vibrant Neo vision and what happens to that. I'll talk more about that in a moment. So how are we filling in open spaces, and where is all this sprawl occurring? So here's an example of Broadview Heights, and you can see our history here. Remember that survey grid I showed you? Well, there it is, right? This is how the township gets laid out, and then you build your town center around that, and you can't have a center because you got your main traffic intersection there. So it's 5 or 6 lanes in each direction, impossible to cross for pedestrian on foot. You build a ring of shopping malls around it, and it's in front of them you put surface parking. Does this sound like a fun place to live and walk your dog? Well, you know, that's the way most of Northeast Ohio is built. So they're trying to get it right. They're trying to plug in some a new kind of housing which is denser and more compact and walkable, and maybe have service alleys back here behind the houses and the townhouses so that cars can go in a garage in the back, and your main streetscape here is reserved for walking. So they're trying to get it right. Let's see, but they did a much better job in downtown Hudson, which was a fantastic suburban retrofit, taking kind of a wasteland and turning it into a terrific project that's walkable. And this new Main Street here is one of the nicest spaces in Northeast Ohio. That's the kind of thing I think we need to do at all scales in downtown Cleveland and in Hudson's and places like that. We're doing it in Kent, Ohio, which is also fantastic. But here's an example from Streetsboro where you can see the original crossing that was at the center of town with this ghost image of what had been a town square. And they've killed it. They've destroyed it. You know, when you build something like this, this is a 50 to 100 year decision. or maybe a 200-year decision. So you're going to undo this if you want to have a heart in your downtown and create a walkable community. It's going to be very hard for Streetsboro to turn itself around. I just want to talk for a few minutes about how I evaluate things that come across my desk when I'm opining about all of this. I was trying to think, how do you define good design, taking all of this into account, the global scale, our place on the earth, global warming, all of that. Well, I think you have to go back to the ancient Roman architect Vitruvius, who really got it right about 3,000 years ago. He summarized design as involving, good design involving sturdiness, it's got to stand up, comfort, commoditas, it has to keep the rain off your head, but also delight, venustas, beauty. And, you know, we really haven't improved on that in 3,000 years. I believe that beauty creates lasting value. That's why I write about aesthetics and all of these other things, in the context of all these other things. And I think quality design also encourages attachment to place, so that we have a sense of pride, a sense of connection to our community, just as we would to the Cavs or the Browns, and hopefully even more so. And I put up the Leonardo da Vinci drawing of Vitruvian Man because in the Renaissance, Italian artists like Leonardo da Vinci rediscovered the principles of Vitruvius. These textbooks were taken out of the old libraries and dusted off and read again. And he superimposes the image of a man on top of pure geometric forms, the circle and the square. And the idea here is not just that human beings are perfect, but that the human body can be a kind of a yardstick for designing anything you want. And that is an idea that moves forward in design to Le Corbusier and Frank Lloyd Wright and so many other designers that we revere. Are we doing this in Cleveland? You bet we are. We're doing some great things here. Here's the nucleus proposal, which we just covered last week. I think that the uptown development with the apartments designed by Stanley Seidowitz, the architect from San Francisco, are absolutely fantastic. I think the street, Euclid Avenue, as it goes through the uptown development, is probably maybe the best block in America. Think about that. Best new block in America. And then just yesterday I saw what Heinen's has in store for the Ameritrust Rotunda, bringing a beloved landmark back into the heart of our downtown community. Some other great ideas that are coming forward now. This is coming out of NOACA, a Transportation for Livable Communities Initiative grant, is funding a study to create a beautiful network of bike paths and greenways on the east side, which, let's see where we are now. Here is, where are we? Shaker Boulevard. So we're in this quadrant. We're right about there. So you can see that from here you'd be able to get on a trail that would go all the way up to Euclid, go on the lakefront, come down into Cleveland. Here's Opportunity Corridor. And I think, you know, once you get downtown, you can get to the Towpath Trail and out to the Cuyahoga Valley National Park. So to do this, we have to redesign our streets. This is a very baggy city, very baggy region. We built for those 5 million people that I talked about with that headline. And so we have rights of way that are too wide. We have streets that have traffic counts that are too low for the width. And we're paying for all that asphalt. Can we use it in some other way that's more productive for society? Yes. And so one of the proposals is in this Greenway study. And let's see, tonight is Wednesday. There's a meeting on that tonight. I think it may be somewhere else in Beechwood. I'm not sure. But anyhow, if you look at our website, there are 3 other meetings about this if you want to go and sound off on it this week. This is one of the proposals for a standard urban street, but there are many other formats that you could use to create linear parks and bikeways through the fabric that we've built. I spoke about Uptown, which is just so wonderful, the way these buildings hug the street and create a public room and create these beautiful intersections where the architecture just flows around the space and creates beautiful vistas. And then the alley here with the view that lines up perfectly with the front door of the new Cleveland Institute of Art expansion and renovation. We've got MoCA here. This is city building, architecture, urban design, and planning at a very, very high scale, high level of achievement. It took an incredible collaboration of foundations, the university, nonprofit cultural institutions, developers to get all of this to happen. It's very rare. It's of national, if not international, significance. And I was talking about the streetscape. This is the kind of thing that really civilizes a city. A grassy median, a street that's used for transit, for automobiles, that has plenty of on-street parking, which is actually a very good thing. You don't want to get rid of cars. A line of parked cars will make pedestrians feel safe, and it creates another kind of a public room here on the sidewalk. And it also encourages all kinds of people to come into the neighborhood. Beautiful urban housing and good landscaping. Things that I don't like, the Innerbelt bridge design, the way the Innerbelt is being designed is really not a very imaginative redo on what was done in the 50s and 60s. Other cities across America are doing much more creative things with their downtown highway connections. They're decking over them, they're burying them, they're moving them like, you know, a length of fire hose away from the downtown so you create more area for development. We failed to do that in Cleveland. That is a 100-year mistake. And it's a very expensive mistake. This is $3 billion of stuff here as it goes all the way around. The bridges are probably $1 billion of it. Opportunity corridor, I'd say the jury is out. And I say that because this project is really marketed as doing two things, and they're downplaying one versus the other. One is to create a connection from I-490 to at East 55th Street to University Circle on this right-of-way. And the other is to redevelop all of this blighted urban land on the east side by giving it a new address and changing the land value dynamics so that all of these properties have frontage on a major street that is connected to the interstate highway system. So people who are on the green sustainability side of the argument say, you know, fie on Ohio and Cleveland for funding this because it's an investment in automobiles, and we shouldn't be thinking about that because in the future society is going to be moving away from cars. I'm not so sure about that. You know, on the other hand, there are very committed people at the Greater Cleveland Partnership who say, you know, how else are you going to redevelop this land unless you make a major infrastructure investment? And I just showed you another infrastructure investment that kind of turned things around, and that was the Euclid Avenue Bus Rapid Transit line, which helped create Uptown. Bang for the buck. So infrastructure, transportation changes land value. We just don't know what's going to happen here, and it all depends on the civic effort to assemble these properties, to plan them, to create urban design guidelines and zoning, that's the big stick, to encourage developers to come in and create the kind of city that we want as opposed to more sprawl. Sprawl in the city, that's not what you want. So what is the task of design? The big one is make density attractive. We're going to have to use land more wisely in Northeast Ohio and wean ourselves from this wasteful pattern that we have now. We have to redevelop the urban cores, and that means making density more attractive. And the biggest thing that I could think we could do is make our cities more walkable. So one book that I would recommend from tonight would be Walkable City by Jeff Speck. I didn't mention the lakes. I have to say something about fresh water, which is so important. This is a vision from an architect in Chicago for actually planning the entire region along the lines of the Northeast Ohio Sustainability Consortium, but, you know, with the international boundaries removed and state lines removed. So what the question he's asking is, what would this look like, this region, if we plan the entire watershed as one place on the earth? And the mission was to safeguard our water resources. I think things would look very different. That's a very provocative question and a topic for another lecture. So the choice is ours. Are we going to create paradise or end up like poor old Sisyphus there on the right? And I'm ready for questions. Thank you. Michael, you're the early bird.
I don't want to leave water that quickly.
Yeah.
Tell us what's going on in terms of the lakefront or riverfronts. Do you think that those areas have opportunities, and are we going to realize them?
I would be much more optimistic about the river than the lake, because I think we've built, remember the 50 to 100 year mistakes that we make? I think we made some 200 year mistakes on our lakefront by cutting off downtown from the waterfront, or actually building the waterfront beyond the railroads and the highways. So surmounting that, and we have the 70-foot grade change. The difference between Cleveland and Chicago or Baltimore, cities that have the really cool waterfronts, is that we don't have the wherewithal, either at the local or regional level, or the connection to federal pork to solve that problem. So I'm a little dubious about whether Dick Pace can develop the 28 acres around the harbor. I certainly hope he can. I wouldn't want to put any obstacles in his way. I think we should all go down there tonight, drive down there and stand there for 10 minutes and ask, how likely it is that that's going to be easy to market or build on. So I'm a little dubious about it. I think the Flats East Bank project, which was heavily subsidized, will be a success, and I hope that encourages other developers to come in and that they don't have to be so heavily subsidized as they build around the flats. The flats is the area I'd watch. Okay, yes ma'am.
You talked about Hudson.
Yes.
And the development, while Shaker's going through a change. Have you seen what they're planning? Is it going to be a walkable city?
Yes, I've seen it. So I like it. I think it's a great idea. Could the design be better? Yeah, probably a little bit. I'd massage it this way or that. The problem with it is that what they published isn't the whole thing. When you see the whole thing, it makes sense. But they can't talk about the whole thing because they don't have site control over the properties south of, is it Chagrin? Or maybe Van Aken. Maybe it's Van Aken and Chagrin. Yeah. No, they do control that. So the Farnsley area, that part of it, they're going to start building that, and that's going to be very nice. But it wouldn't be as nice or as successful. If they are able to build what they would like to build, I think it has the chance to be Hudson times, I don't know if I would say times 10, maybe even if it's times 2, that would be pretty darn good. Will it do what Shaker Heights needs as far as the tax base is concerned? I haven't seen any numbers on that, but I would like to. And so you just reminded me to ask that question. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
My fear is that what's happening now is that all of a sudden we're hearing about all this development downtown and these apartments and restaurants and buildings that are going up, and are we overbuilding? Are we going to end up with empty buildings?
I don't think so. That's more of a market question, and I can't predict, is there a market, but, there's a very, very strong signal now. When you have 98.3% occupancy, that demand is there. And, developers get quarterly reports, not annual reports, quarterly reports on all of those ratios and flows of people in and out of spaces. And those are signals to developers and to lenders. So they watch that stuff all the time. I think what you may be thinking about is, the amount of office space that was built at one time, and a lot of it is vacant. But that's a situation that evolved over 60 or 70 years. In terms of the demand right now for housing, I think it's very strong. The question is, we've been dealt some very nice cards. How are you going to handle that hand? As with every round of betting that comes along, it's going to bear very close watching. But I have to say, it's really exciting. It's also part of a national trend. It's completely like what's happening in Baltimore and Philadelphia and so many other cities. We're part of it. Yes.
How do you feel about the development of the Berwitt Lakefront Airport? Is there potential there to change the...
I wouldn't touch Burke. I would leave it alone. The last thing you want to do now is inject 400 acres of lakefront land into the equation. You might possibly siphon off everything that's happening in downtown. And development there, again, would be separated by, I don't know how many lanes of concrete and how many, 4 railroad lines and a 70-foot drop. It's a quarter mile. It's a quarter mile just to get, if you drew a straight line, I'm not talking about walking up East 9th Street from somewhere a quarter mile out at Burke, but if you just drew a straight line from the center of Burke to 18th Street, it would be a quarter mile of yuck. So it's not really part of the downtown. I would much rather see a Bob Stark get financing for the Nucleus Tower, bring wealthy people into downtown to live on top of what was a parking lot. That's what we ought to be worried about. Forget about Burke. We got to worry about filling in the parking lots downtown and creating a dense, vibrant city. There is tons of room to build a dense, lively, beautiful, vibrant city. We've got the talent, the design talent, and the development talent in Cleveland and Northeast Ohio now to do this. And if not, it can be imported. NBBJ can design the skyscraper if we don't have skyscraper architects in Cleveland. But the carrying capacity is there on the land. Downtown is terribly underused. There's too much surface parking, and that kills it. You got to fill in the streets. Next question. Yes?
So the slide that you showed around the millennial changes in population,
Yes.
you showed that the Cleveland millennial population had decreased significantly relative to the general population, but also in Pittsburgh, the last line
Yes.
on your slide, it increased.
Yes.
So I'm a millennial that lives in the suburbs, and I work in the new economy, right? I work in healthcare. And as a millennial, how do I either encourage, engage? I'm not saying that my generation has the answer, but how do we engage to increase either the number of millennials in the city or and engage in these conversations to improve urbanization?
Well, I think it's happening. I see a lot of social activity, a lot of ways that younger people can gather together and talk about the city and talk about creativity and talk about ideas. There are these Pachacha nights that have been happening. I think there's like 15 or 20 of them that have been held so far. Those are fantastic. There are groups of young leaders forming, and believe me, anyone in power wants to talk to people like you. I mean, it's just, everybody wants to know, what do you want? We'll give it to you. Because it's the young people who are going to shape the future of the region. And so figuring out how to turn those numbers around and get something that looks more like Pittsburgh or Philadelphia or Baltimore, and that was very good. You noticed that in the lower right corner of that table. Those are cities that increased their millennial population. So how do we do that? Part of it, I think, is the momentum that's going to build on things like the food revolution that we have going on in Cleveland. It's everything that makes the city more exciting and attractive as a place to live, work, shop, visit, whatever, is going to help. So it's not just millennials. You've got to get everybody involved, but, thanks for your question. Yes?
Yeah, I'd like you to comment on possibly Heinen's store downtown being a major catalyst for attracting people into the core, and also the redevelopment of Public Square.
Okay, I'll take the Heinen's first. Heinen's is an absolutely monumental achievement, and I have to say hats off to the brothers, Tom and Jeff, for making that investment. It is a risky investment. They don't know how well it's going to go. But they also knew that if they didn't grab the Ameritrust Rotunda, somebody else would. And you have a sympathetic developer there with I don't know how many units of housing built in that's connected to your supermarket. So there's something. But I think the Heinen brothers are really betting that the millennials are going to respond. And not just the millennials, but the empty nesters are going to respond very dramatically to the presence of high-end, high-quality, high-service shopping, grocery shopping in downtown Cleveland. It's a turning point It's an incredible thing for any redeveloping city to get a supermarket. I remember watching the redevelopment of the Toronto lakefront for many years, and for the longest time they couldn't get a supermarket south of the Gardner Expressway, where so much public investment had been made in redeveloping the waterfront, building a beautiful bike trail and cultural facilities on the piers, and apartment skyscrapers and all of that. But it took a couple of decades before they got the supermarket and an elementary school. But now that they have, it's really starting to become a community. And that's what I think is going to happen with Heinen's. I think it's going to turn downtown into a community. It's also going to be a civilizing influence on the center city. Because even if you don't shop there, you know you can go in and just buy a glass of wine at 5 o'clock, sit there with friends, and watch the urban spectacle. Watch people coming and going. I just think it's going to be pure catnip. I can hardly wait to see it. Okay, Public Square. Public Square, I think, is a very smart investment in freshening up our gray public spaces in downtown Cleveland. And it is a piece of infrastructure. It's got roads in it, it's got sewers, it's got, you know, all that stuff that was built in the 1850s and is falling apart. So digging it all up and redoing it and creating something that's beautiful and green and can be used for more than waiting for buses is a good idea. Yes, sir, on the left.
You mentioned the uptown area. Right on the edge of it is East Cleveland, which is an economic and political basket case. But on balance, if it were to be merged into Cleveland, if it could be done with all the rules, which it must be enormous, would it benefit the city in the long run?
Yeah, I think it would benefit. I think merger of East Cleveland and Cleveland would benefit both communities. But it's, you know, just giving a political control, even in such an extreme circumstance, is so difficult. So if it's just another example of how hard it is to think big in this region. We're just saddled with these. We're a small box region. We think small. We got to persuade a zillion mayors and a zillion city councilmen and a zillion, you know, office holders to do anything around here. We have a gap at the regional level. The two scales that we should be thinking on in terms of planning the future of this region are the region and the neighborhood. That's where we should be focusing our attention. Yes, sir.
On the issue of regionalism, I'd like to bring up the issue of light rail. I've always been surprised that the RTA is kind of imprisoned within Cuyahoga County and has never been extended to the suburbs. And yet, every time I've ever seen light rail extended, every station becomes a node for huge amounts of density, and it sucks the density out of the surrounding area and rebuilds it around the station, which, going to your point of making cities more efficient, seems to be a good thing to do. Why haven't we seen something done with the RTA, or are there natural barriers to prevent that from happening?
They tax within their area, and then there are other transit agencies that tax within their areas, and they try to plan together. But it's too many layers, and we haven't gotten on top of that problem. The Vibrant Neo plan was an attempt to put that on the table, and I think we should have a lot more conversation about it. Perhaps we should be talking about merging the 4 MPOs so that we don't have NOACA and AMATs, and I forget what the others are called. But, we need to be thinking bigger.
30 years
one
ago,
follow-up?
Yeah, one follow-up. 30 years ago, Denver created a regional transportation authority and built a light rail system in a sprawling western city. So, I mean, it can happen.
Absolutely. There are many other cities that are better at regionalism than we are. Minneapolis, Denver, Portland. Yes, sir.
Along the same lines as Heinen's moving to downtown, do you ever see meaningful retail moving back to downtown? I mean, I lived through the Tower City when it opened and had a lot of hope and fizzled out pretty strongly.
Well, I guess it depends on what you mean by meaningful. There's East 4th Street, I think, is a start. But if you mean like retail beyond food and beverage and entertainment,
right.
Yeah. It's not my field. I don't know. But Bob Stark thinks the potential is there, and he wants to wrap the entire ground floor of both of his blocks with retail. So, he thinks the time is now, and he's going to test that. I'm going to go over here. Yes, ma'am.
I live not too far from the Uptown project, And if not, now that we have, literally have tourists coming through the area where I live, and I live up in Forest Hills. So it's not just millennials who are looking at the area to live in, but people who are coming from like Westlake, Bay Village, who are taking tours through the neighborhood to see, look at the kind of housing that's there. Now, with the Uptown project, as it, from what I understand, continues to move further up Euclid, and you run into East Cleveland, then that whole section there, is that someplace that would be torn down and then you put the project to expand? And that just, what happens to homeowners and all those people who live there?
Well, I think the answer to that is that the foundations and University Circle and all of the institutions in the area are moving beyond what had been described as University Circle. So the new mantra is, the new name for this entity that's emerging is Greater University Circle. So it would include Fairfax, Huff, East Cleveland, Little Italy, with everybody at the table. I don't think displacement is what anybody wants. I think the idea is to create jobs through the evergreen co-ops that have been started, to create incentives for employees to move into the neighborhood, to live there. And, gosh, there's plenty of open land for redevelopment, and empty, vacant lots where houses need to be, or abandoned houses that need to be removed. So there's plenty of room to redevelop without the negative aspects of gentrification. I don't think Cleveland is a city that needs to worry about the negative aspects of gentrification as you would in, let's say, Brooklyn, where you had that Forest City development that was pushing longtime residents out. Yes, ma'am.
I hope this isn't really too far off topic, but the police problems that we've been seeing, how do you see this as affecting any of this development?
I don't think it's off topic at all. I think, but I think it's negative. It's bad for the city of Cleveland. That's the bad news. The reality is that Cleveland is far from alone with this problem. So, I'd say it's an opportunity for Cleveland to distinguish itself in terms of how it solves the problem. But, what we're not talking about in this presentation, we're just talking about this, I think, pretty much from a white middle class viewpoint, looking at the city as a place to live and work. If we look at it through another lens, through, first of all, through the lens of race, and in terms of how racial conflict has pushed people apart over the past many decades, that's a problem that's still with us. But the urban poverty in Cleveland is intractable. It's absolutely imperative that the schools be improved. And I think one thing that we don't understand is how the population loss of the past 10, 15 years is a result of African Americans moving out of the city of Cleveland. So the 100,000 people who left between 2000 and 2010, we really don't know who they are. We need to look at that. Yes, back in the corner.
I just have one comment about, you spoke about the millennials being downtown and the wealthy folk being downtown. What really concerns me is the lack of affordable housing downtown for middle class people, not upper middle class people, but truly. And I remember attending a lot of those meetings that Ari Marin was having at University Circle before they created Uptown, and talking about affordable housing, but affordable for who? Because at the time I was living in Pepper Pike, and I couldn't afford to live in University Circle because all the new housing was just over the top.
Wow. I'm not knowledgeable enough about prices to know what what your how you would define affordable. All I can say is I think a lot of the product that is out there now has been pitched to apartment dwellers who are going to be moving into high-level professional jobs. So these would be graduate students in medicine or related fields who are here for 3 or 4 years and are willing to pay $2 a square foot for housing in University Circle and live in something small. So the product that's out there on the market is not sort of the downsizing middle class dwelling. That's not what developers have seen as the market. Whether they will is an open question. I hope they do.
Don't you need that market in case the millennials really do decide to abandon? You know, you're going to have a transient population, and at some point, it seems to me that for stability...
Not something you can legislate, but maybe the city ought to be looking at how to attract middle-class residents. I don't think the city is in a position, though, to require developers to have a percentage of this or that in their complexes, as you would in a strong market city like New York. That's the problem. Yes, sir.
When you develop the downtown area and the millennials are interested in it, how do you keep them there when they are raising families and they don't have a decent school system?
Did everyone hear the question about how do you keep the millennials if the schools aren't great? Well, this is one reason why I think it's essential that the Cleveland Metropolitan School District and Cleveland State University continue to collaborate on creating the Cleveland International School, which is an international baccalaureate program. It's housed in a building that's owned by Cleveland State. It is now K through 4 and is growing by 1 grade a year, and ultimately will be a K-12 school with a population of 800 students. Admission will be by lottery, and it'll be proportional depending on where you live. So many of the spots are going to be reserved for low-income Cleveland families, but there are also going to be spots for Cleveland State University employees and their families, and even space for suburban kids to attend that school.
Do you really think 800 capacity is going to be enough?
I think it's a start. You've got to start somewhere. I think it's the Heinens of education. Is that it? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming. In case you can't read it, Steve has his email address right there on the screen if you want to continue this conversation with him. And I'm sure he'd be willing to stick around a little bit in the lobby. So thank you for being here, and get back soon.